Oyster is beautiful, delicious, so plentiful all over the Irish coast. Each one of these oysters that we have here today is from a different area, from Ireland, from the island, and each one will have its own slight different flavours. There's a massive difference between what happens on the land and what happens in the sea. For example, these little guys here are from Castle in Connemara. Now these oysters are grown on the beach just in front of where an old sugar beet farm was. So there's a residual sugar in the land which washes into the water, which gives these almost a dessert flavour, really, really sweet. So really easy to do at home, but you just need to know how to shuck them, I suppose, safely. The first thing you'll need is an oyster knife. I've got a few examples here of different oyster knives. Basic, classic, you know, American-styled oyster shucker to the classic French up and L, number 9 oyster knife. And then this little beauty here, which is the Fingal Ferguson. It's a handcrafted knife made in West Cork. When buying your oysters, there's a few important things you need to look out for. One, the oyster should feel heavy, which means there's plenty of water inside your oyster. Your oyster should be cold, and there shouldn't be any smell whatsoever. That just literally smells like a rock on the beach, and effectively that's what they are almost. When buying them, you buy them from a fishmonger ideally, and then storing them, just make sure you store them with the cup side down. Comme ça. If you don't and it's over on its side, what happens is all the water will drip out, and that's what the oyster needs to live on. A good oyster will last in your fridge for 2 to 3 days easily. Just at the bottom of your fridge, put a damp tea towel over the top of them, and then that's them happy for a few days. So to shuck an oyster, you basically have two kind of parts to it. So you've got the fringe here at the front, and you've got the hinge here at the back. So classically, in many countries you go from the hinge, whereas in France and other countries you may go in from the fringe here at the front. Personally, I'm a hinge kind of guy. Place your oyster down on a tea towel, cover the front part, and just take the tip of your knife like this. You just want to go into the back of the oyster with this, and just go side to side, just until you feel it just go in, just ever so slightly. And then you basically rev it like it's a motorbike handle, and your oyster will open up. Now you've got one more connective muscle just along here on the top. I just want to scrape along there. And that's your lovely oyster. You can see there's plenty of water. Lovely, fresh, plump oyster. There's one more muscle here, but you can just cut away from there. And that's your oyster fully shucked and free from the shell now. If you want, you can be all fancy and you can turn it over. Also, now. When you do get your oyster served to you in a restaurant though, what you're looking for is this lovely clear water. The meat itself shouldn't be burst, it shouldn't be cream running around it. If it is done like that, it means your oyster's been shook incorrectly. So this little one here has got my name written all over it, and so many times in the restaurants you see people and they never really get to enjoy the oyster to its full ability. So I suppose my tip for enjoying your oyster is, first of all, what you want to do is you want to taste the water in the oyster, and it's going to customize your palate to that, you know, that sheer sea ocean flavor. You can look at it like you're, you know, it's either like kissing a mermaid or being slapped by a fish, depending on how much you like the oyster. But what that give you is, that will give you the marrow, and that will give you the flavour from the sea and from where they're farmed. The next water, the second water that's produced, will give you the terroir. So the oyster will start to release water, and will give you the flavours of the land behind it. So be it that there's sugar grown there, or cucumbers, or it's a dairy field, or whatever it may be, that will continue on into the land. So the relationship between the sea and the land is so important when it comes to these oysters. Oysters also, so then when you're eating your oyster, really, really importantly, and the main reason people gag on oysters all the time is because they try and swallow something this big in a hole this big. So it really doesn't work. So you need to chew your oyster, at least one bite on each side of your mouth. You don't need to go mad at it. It's not a steak. You don't need to chew and chew and chew, but definitely give it a bite on each side of your mouth. And then you'll really begin to taste all the different flavors and textures of the oyster. Cheers. Stunning, sweet, delicious, briny. Really, really gorgeous. So what else we're going to do for them is to make a really simple dressing, a mignonette vinaigrette. Sounds really, really complicated, and people overcomplicate it all the time, and it's so simple. So we're going to make one for you now. So a mignonette vinaigrette is basically a shallot vinegar. Some people will use a sherry vinegar, or they'll use different kind of vinegars. Me, I just use the most basic red wine vinegar that I can find, and it works absolutely perfect. You want a nice small dice. And the crunch from your shallot when you're eating your oyster, texturally is just delicious. This is just a really simple, just a red wine vinegar, bog standard. I know it feels like I'm cheating now completely, but that's it. That's a mignonette vinaigrette. The acidic is the vinegar, and the bite of the onion is just delicious with it. A funny kind of thing about oysters and vinegars and lemons, more importantly, and why we first started to add these to oysters is because it was to check if the oyster was still alive and how fresh they were. So the oyster carts used to go through the streets, and you squeeze a little bit of lemon or put a little bit of vinegar on them, and the frill of the oyster before the final shuck was done would crimple as the acid from the vinegar or the lemon was poured onto it, and that's how the two of them started to come together in this little marriage. Now it was just, you know, coincidental that they just happened to go together really, really well, but that's where it started from. So there we go. Oysters on a half shell. Okay, so we're going to do like a grilled oyster almost. We actually use a blowtorch in Klaw because it's such a tiny, tiny, tiny little crab shack. We weren't allowed to have a grill to grill our oysters. So we came up with the bright idea that we'd use a blowtorch. And we began using those little blowtorches you use for your creme brulees, but after time we just kind of went for these big kind of commercial beasts, and it was a real kind of happy coincidence. So what you get is you get the lovely charred, smoky flavour from the torch and from cooking it, but then you also get the cold and the salinity from the bottom of it, so you're kind of getting best of both worlds. I'm going to do two different types here today. One is a take on a Rockerfeller oyster, which we call our rockers, and then the other one is a Arabic style oyster. Okay, so we've shook our little oysters here, and now what we're going to do is, this is a little bit of wilted spinach. So I'm just going to add a little bit of wilted spinach to the top of these. And now this here is a compound of butter that we made earlier on. So really simple butter, just soften the butter, some Parmesan, some garlic, and now we're going to give that a little torch. So as you can imagine, this is really exciting when we go to a table and do this in the restaurant. So now, just cheese makes everything better. And that is our turn of a sizzling rocker oyster. So the next two that we're going to do is an Arabic style butter, this compound of butter here. So it's a combination of harissa, sumac, lime zest, and then a softened butter. The sumac is just delicious with seafood in general, as is the harissa. So I'm just going to finish these off with, this is a little bit of dried crispy shallot and some coriander or cilantro. And that's our Arabic style torched oyster. Obviously with the blowtorch, while as exciting and fun as it is, you don't need to use one. You can just pop it onto your grill. 2 to 3 minutes will give you almost the same result. Enjoy.